Hello and welcome to another free code session. My name is Jason Bach, and as I said in the previous episode, I'm going to be switching gears and moving to some stuff in EditorConfigGenerator. And this is stuff that's going to... Sorry about the throat. Just a little parched here. These are ones that are going to be a little bit... Oh, how should I say? Fun to do. Part of it's going to be fun because I don't even remember the last time I touched this, like really did something in this code. And it is always an adventure to look at code that you wrote and go, what in the hell was I thinking when I wrote this? Like, I just don't even, sorry, I just don't even understand what it is that I'm doing. So there's that. I also did some cleanup in GitHub this morning and just updated the spackle package and set the milestones and some things and blah, blah, blah. I mean, just tidied things up a little bit. And then I also worked last night on some other CSLA stuff with analyzers just to get it off the plate. And I think now at this point, there's only one left, and that has to do with a weird code fix styling thing. So maybe I'll get to that later. I'm going to do that off camera. I don't find that... Again, I purposely am trying to switch gears here and do a bunch of other stuff. So this is one of them, and this is stuff I've been avoiding because I don't think it's going to be easy. I may have to do some editing when I'm just sitting there going like for a long time, and that would not be fun to watch. So the first thing I'm doing with EditorConfigGenerator is this bug. Or Novotny declared it as a bug. I guess that's semantics, but he is correct in that this style here, there are three. There's actually a fourth, and I'm just going to purposely go la 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 to the fourth one because I need to get my head around the third one here first. And I'm looking over at the things here, and yeah, he says true or false, and it's not true or false. It's actually different. There's and I have it right here. It's always or never. But there's also two more. There's omit if default, and that's the one that he mentioned. But then there's for non-interface members. And if you look at the documentation, it says this is the same as always, and has been added for future proofing if C# adds default interface methods. Well, guess what they did? They added that. It's actually default interface members. So, yay. I'm just going to ignore that for now. I'm going to try to do this one that he mentioned, which is to add omit if default. So if you prefer accessibility modifiers to be specified, except if they are the default modifier. So what does that mean? So here's the thing that we're getting at. Here you can see that this class is declared as public. Okay. Now, what is the actual default? If I didn't put public here, it would be internal. Okay. So now here's the question that I have in my head that I got to debate. And this will be true for all the other things, because you notice this one is just looking for a member declaration. This are classes, structs, fields, properties, all those things. Okay. I can say public class A. Okay. I can also say internal class B. And I can also just say class C. Okay. Whoops. This one means that C is omit if default. I don't put it in here. Or do I not put it in here because... Yeah, this is where I get confused by the rule here. I have to go back to where it's defined. I have so many tabs open. Oh, come on. There we go. Prefer accessibility modifiers to be specified, except if they are the default modifier. So how would you tell the difference? Like, prefer accessibility modifiers be specified, always. So that would mean I ran into two cases like this. You always put it in, regardless if it's the default or not. Okay. The second one would be never, which is I found it, or is this omit by default? Because if this is the one that I found, then it means that I never wanted it? Or do I omit it because it's the default? I can't tell in that case. I don't know which one is which in this case. Because I don't really have a feel for what your style is. And again, this is just me talking out loud. I don't have an answer to this just yet. I have to rationalize this in my head to figure out what exactly it is I'm going to do to omit this thing. Emit this value. What happens if I see this? Well, I omitted it in one case, but I did it in another. So what would that mean? And if I watch this later, I know I'm eventually going to come to a conclusion to say, you dumbass, this is exactly what you should have come to the conclusion for. But this means, yeah, I want it. Yeah, I want it. No, I don't. I would say that always wins in this case. I mean, this again is omitting a style. This gets to the statistics, which I think, if I remember right, let me go to statistics file. I think I put that in the milestone as well. Yes, I did. Okay, so because I can show, like, what would I show in this case? If you omit it, it means I want the default. If I put it in, then it means I want to put it in. As stupid as that just sounded. God, where did I put this stuff? There we go. Like, what's the difference between never and omit? That's the thing that I'm struggling with here. Is, you know, you're just going to either say always or never. Omit by default. Like if I had like a class here, and I know this isn't just classes, these are just members. I could have methods in here as well that don't have it. If I don't have it for this one, but let's say I put in like void foo. Okay. Okay, fine. What is the default for a method? And this is actually something I had to look up, which is class instruct member. Okay, like, what are the default ones? So for namespace, enumerator, free class, namespace, enumerator, class, struct, delegate, constructor. Method is private by default. Okay. I'll assume that's correct. So in this case, I'm saying I wanted it to be private, but what happens if I say private void bar? Well, now I've got a case where I'm saying declare it even if it is the default. So that's what I'm just not understanding here is, it's funny, their code examples that they have on the docs page shows either always or never. And then they also have, because always is the same for non-interface members, then they lump it into the same one, but they do not give an example for omit if default. So I would really, I think, need to talk to Oren and go, how would you define this as a bug, and how would you state, how would I figure this out? Because I'm having a really hard time here looking at this going, I don't see the difference. Unless you are using modifiers or accessibility modifiers. Because in the cases where it's, see, but if it's, you're putting it in the cases where it's like I'm just not understanding, and just because I don't understand doesn't mean I don't get the rule. But I just can't understand what the difference would be between those, and I also find it funny that they don't even have an example to say, hey. And what's really interesting is if you look at their their code example, they don't put on the class that it should be a internal class. They don't even put the modifier on it. Accessibility modifier. Unless they're, well, even if they're just talking about, because accessibility modifiers can go in a class. So I don't, like, the whole example is really confusing. Prefer accessibility modifiers to be specified, except if they are the default modifier. So what would that mean? It means that if I don't put it in, if I don't have a modifier, then that means that I'm omitting it because it's the default. If I put in this case, internal, that means always. So, okay, let's think of this. I'm just going to put commentary here because I really need to write this out. Oh, for God's sakes, come on. Just, yeah, there. Stupid comments. Okay, if the modifier is given and it is the, well, okay, wait, I almost had it and then I lost it again. If you're going to give me a modifier and it is the default, then that means you lean heavily towards always. If the modifier is not given, well, then it means you want to use the default. But maybe you just wrote an entire code base where you just always pick the defaults. If you specify it and it is not the default, you have to. You don't have a choice. If you meant for a class to be public, where by default it's internal, you have to say public. And the only thing I can conclude is that if you put it in where it is the default, that you actually like less of omit as default. Yeah, so what did I just say? If you put the modifier in and it is the default, it means you like what's this called? Omit if default less. Okay. So there's if you don't put the modifier in, it means you prefer never. If you put the modifier in, and it is not the default, it means you like, for some version of like, omit if default more. We really can't tell. All we can say is that if you put it in, it means you want to use a modifier, but you potentially, so we need cases. We need cases where, what it really comes down to is how many times did you put in a modifier when it is the default, compared to how many times you put a modifier in, or how many times you did not put the modifier in. Right? So let's say case never, case always not default, for a stupid name, and always default. Okay, so let's say we had 3 nevers. That's all we knew. That means you want to use never. Let's say we had 3 nevers and 1 always not default. Well, now what I do right now is I simply say, what is the biggest one? Okay. So Boolean data's got to go because I can't use it. I'm going to have these 3 cases, I think. In this case, the best thing I can conclude is, well, you still favor never, as far as I can tell. Let's say you have 3 nevers, 3 always default. So you're putting it in. And then it's just which one do I say is a bigger style than the other one. I would just default to always in this case, because you really have to pick one, and it probably means that you don't admit it. Then you do. How would I determine if you let's say I had 3 nevers. Yeah, because if you're putting in like 3 always default, and let's be a little bit more consistent with how I'm doing this logic in my head. Then let's say I ran into 3 always default. I'm sorry, not default. Well, I'm starting to see a greater than here. Let's say I do 4 here, 3 here, and 5 there. So I'm specifying it. 3 cases I am, 4 I'm not. So if always not default is largest, winning ties, if always default is largest, is greater than or equal to never, then then emit always. Else, if it's the other way around, it does mean you want to put the qualifier in unless you don't have it. So this is where I think you'd say omit if default. Okay. Else, if always default is largest winning. So no. Is greater than or equal to never. So always default means that you pretty much don't like omit if default. But you could have always default be like 10. No, if it's greater than or equal to never, then we say always. Else, if never, so we had 10, that was 10, but that was like 10. No, because that would win ties. So forward, never would have to be 10. Always on default would be 9. This is just a heuristic I got to come up with. It's just as simple as that. This is saying that, so you kind of would have in this case 10, like 10 nevers, like 9 always not default. I think 8 always default. Because if always not default is the largest, winning ties, then you just pick one of the two. So it can't be that. Always not default has to be strictly less than never. Then always default has to be greater than equal. So it has to be strictly less than the nevers. It also had to be strictly less than always not default. So I think that's the right logic, I think. So in this case, what you're saying is, well, yes, it seems like nevers are winning. But you did also say, like the sum of the other two are greater. So if the sum of, so if we say always not default plus, so we need to say if nevers is greater than or equal to, then we want to say never. So that's like you said, 10 nevers, 2 and 3. You clearly like nevers. I mean, again, it's statistical. I think this is right. Else, if they still triumph over nevers, like the summation of the two triumph, I have to keep this in the code because otherwise I'm going to be like, what in the hell did I come up with? So if it's less, then it matters if, then I think if you say always default, if always default is greater than or equal to always not default, then you're going to put in always. I'm going to have to like stop this episode and I'm going to do my little stretching Sunday workout, and then I'm going to have some lunch, and then I'm going to play a board game with Liz, and then I'll come back to this and review it, you know, kind of do the little sleep on this and think if this is crazy or not. Else, so you had a lot of nevers. Well, wait a minute, what's the difference here? You had a lot of nevers that was greater than those individually, but together they were still more. So otherwise we can say here omit if default. With a heuristic for omit if default. All right, so I think that's what I'm going to stick with for now. And like I said, I'm going to do my little, I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to do my stretching and stuff and just kind of leave this on the back burner for now. Right now, this seems again to be logical to me, but yeah, this is that we have to come up with some kind of like heuristic, something to kind of say, what do you prefer? Okay, if always not default wins, and you also favored always default, then you want always. If always not default wins, but you had nevers more than default, means you're trying to admit if default. If you always put it in, and it is a default, and that's over never, then we're just going to say always. Otherwise, you had more nevers than default. Put a comment in my comment. If the nevers is more sum than the always together, then it means you mean never. Okay. Otherwise, if always default, which means you like omit default less, wins over always not default, then you say always. Otherwise, it means you probably still like. I may want to put a qualification in here to say, if you like, well, omit if default. Like, what does that mean? Like I came down here. What happens if these are 0? Well, if they were 0, and this was 0, we go to never. If this was 1 greater than 0, we go never. We stop. So this would never happen if these were 0 values. This would always hit that. Okay. But if you had in this case, like, where your nevers were not, then we'd look at default and say, you did like it less. Otherwise, there were cases where you did put it in, but you've had a lot of cases where you didn't. So we're going to kind of do this. So, you know, if Oren was sitting next to me right now, I'd go, does this make sense to you? But all the bug report said is there's a third value, and technically there's a fourth, but we're ignoring that for now. There's a third value. And, well, you should admit it. Let me actually go back and look at his... yeah, that value means that accessibility modifiers are not required, are removed by formatting if they're the default for the scope. Kernel for classes, private fields, yeah, but you have to look at it in the large. You have to look at it in terms of the entire code base and go, well, what happens if you did it in one spot and not another, but here you did, but here you didn't? Exactly what I'm trying to do here. And so you have to come up with some rule to say, you know, what do you do? Okay. So, all right, cool. I'm going to leave this for now. I'm going to stop recording, and then I will come back to this maybe later on this afternoon or tonight. And we'll see if I can actually implement this and go back to this and go, Boolean data? What's that? Like statistics, I got Boolean data, expression body data, modifier data, tab space data. I think I'll need to put in here a specific one for this kind, because there's just, you know, it has to have at least 3. Okay, so we're gonna have to do that. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna stop. Thank you all for watching. Leave comments and questions below. See you in the next episode.